Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Carl Carlson.
Hey, Carl. You mentioned we were chatting briefly, and you were talking about had a conversation with a friend of mine, and my thought was you should have recorded that.
Yes. Oh, exactly. Well, this is so interesting because this is a person who wrote me very politely and said, I have a critique of my material. This person said about me, I have a critique of your material. And of course, I'm always interested in that, because I can make mistakes like anybody else. And so I want to hear anything they say. And this person wrote me, and I said, okay, well, let's have a conversation. We'll do it by phone, easiest.
Yeah.
And I'll be happy to listen to the critique, and we can talk about it. And the person got into it and said, Carl, you have a misunderstanding on what a failure mode is. And I'm thinking, oh my God, after all these years, I'm thinking to myself, that would be horrible if I didn't understand what a failure mode is.
Right.
And they said the failure mode is the opposite of the function.
So if if this green light is supposed to come on as a function, then the green light didn't come on is a failure mode.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that's interesting. That to me, that's what the antithesis of the function is. If the function is to provide a certain amount of a pump is to provide a certain pressure, and you can measure that as a requirement in PSI.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could have a failure mode, the antithesis, it doesn't apply that pressure. But there's different modes. I'm thinking to myself, and we talked about it, and he understood it by the end of the conversation, how important the mode is.
Because you're talking about, and now I've commonly started with, what's this device supposed to do? And let's use a pump, right? It's supposed to move liquid at a certain pressure and certain volume or something like that, certain speed. And if it doesn't do that, well, that's one way. If it just doesn't pump at all, right? Or if it's outside of spec, that's, to me, is a failure mode. Yet I agree with what I think you're going after is that, well, it could also be damaging the fluid. That's a different failure mode. It's in spec, but now it's actually chemically changing your fluid to something else. And well, was that one of your specifications or not? Well, maybe not. And that's why I think you want to explore other ways unintended consequence could occur, to not overuse the word failure mode.
Well, yeah. Okay. So this is so important. Because what you brought up on just on the way you described it, you could have no pressure. That could be a mode, or you could have too much pressure.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a mode, or you could have just slightly underneath the required pressure. And so there's different ways. And if we look up the word mode, it's the manner in which something happens.
Well, I've often looked at it. I tried to explain it to a number of people as it's what the observables are. It's not the mechanism. And I've often run into people, they get in between the mechanism and the observation. And so if the pump is leaking, there's dozens of reasons that it could be leaking. It'd be way over pressure and the seal failed, or it could be a crack in the body of it, or it could be this, it could be that. And you can fill in under the causes discussions is then you're talking about mechanisms. What's really going on here?
Yes.
But the mode is it's leaking. There's moisture coming out where you don't want it to.
So you have you're building a container, or even a plastic water bottle.
Okay.
And
with no BHA or BPA.
Yeah,
or
that's right.
You
should have.
You can't have any of that.
And it can have lots of different functions, and that could, but one of the functions is to contain the water.
Right.
So if you say automatically it doesn't contain the water, then you're missing something, because like you said, a mode could be it leaks.
Right.
That's one of the ways it doesn't. It's a mode. I was just looking up the definition just to see if I've got the words right. A way or manner in which something occurs or is experienced. That's what you're looking for. The way I teach this, Fred, is that we're on a journey between the function and the cause. Yep. It's a journey.
Yep.
And the antithesis of the function can be a waypoint early in that journey. And then the mode is a waypoint. And then you could have a high level cause. And then if you use the 5 whys, you can get to the next level and down to the root cause. So you're on a journey between the function and the most basic cause.
Well, it's a way to get at it. I think if you say, what are all the ways this can fail? And I don't know, it was a few months ago, the idea came up is, why don't we list and define all the failure mechanisms, all the possible failure mechanisms? And I got a few comments back going, well, that's a daunting task.
Yes.
There's a lot of them. Yet the FMEA process is, we want to focus in on the failure mechanisms that we can do something about, that are important, that are salient. And part of that process is bounding it. So what is it? What are the ways we can tell if something's failed? Because if nobody notices or cares, even if it happens all the time, do we really want to fix that one? If it's a blemish on the inside of that pump that has no effect on any of its performance parameters, and unless you open up that pump and stick your head in there and notice that there's a manufacturing discoloration, for example, you could list that all day long, yet we're not going to work on it. And I think
you're not adding value.
Yeah, we're not adding value on it. But I think the idea of the FMEA is, in looking at what are the failure modes, is first off looking for those safety things and most catastrophic type things, and then diving down into the ones that matter. Because you can list 25 modes for that failure for the pump. Yet once you get 3 or 4 of them that are the ones the customers really don't want to have happen, like that water bottle, if it just naturally tips over, it's top heavy. That could be a problem.
And so take the water bottle, because that's real simple. Everybody can relate to that. You could have a function that has to contain the water, and another function is it stabilizes, sits upright or something.
It's not like an iPhone where you can actually hold it in your hand without it slipping out.
Yeah, that's right. So there are some functions, and I would characterize those as functions.
Yeah.
And they have requirements. And then we have failure modes. So based on a given function, like it's contains the water, well, you don't want it to leak. So now you can start listing failure modes, and right away you get the effects. Like if it leaks, makes a mess, a person could get thirsty. There's different consequences of the failure mode. And we're going to deal with the most serious ones. And then we can start talking about causes. Okay, if it leaks, what's the cause?
Yeah, it's water soluble. That would be bad design, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
It's rusted through. I've seen that.
Yeah, but the plastic material is water soluble.
Well, that's not too far-fetched. We did a community get-together a few years ago, and somebody brought in a soup to it. It was like a Friendsgiving event, and somebody brought some soup in a crock pot, and it was really hot. And we didn't happen to have adequate utensils and plates and stuff like that. So somebody grabbed one of the coffee cups looking like thing, but it wasn't meant for hot stuff, and got it all the way to the table. And that's the point when it just melted right through. And there was really hot soup all over the table. So
if you do this process right and you get the modes of failure, then you can see which ones are most important, of course, and you have the severity and the severity rating. And then you can get causes and get to the root cause or the deepest cause. Now we can get failure mechanisms. And that's what you brought up. That's the gem, is the underlying cause, like material's too thin or wrong material, whatever. And then the mechanism of failure. If it's metal, it might be fatigue. If it's electrical, it could be EMI. You have different chemical and physics mechanisms. And if we get that, the cause and the failure mechanism, we've got the gem, because now we can do something about it.
Yep.
And that's so important in an FMEA. So knowing the definitions, when I teach, I spend the majority of time not just on definitions, but on exercises that demonstrate the person understands the definitions and can work with them and apply them, can tell them to other people.
I've seen it. I think I don't have it within reach, but the McDermott book on, I've drawn a complete blank on it. It has like a checker pattern cover to it. And it's a small format
I'm
book.
pulling it out right now.
It's in reach for you. Okay.
It's my library. Yeah.
Yeah. My library happens to be in another.
It's called The Basics of FMEA.
The Basics of FMEA. And it goes through a lot of definitions. Here's the columns and what they are and basic concept, build a team. I think it's all good information. It's not meant to be totally in depth. I've always used it as, all right, I got 10 people coming to this event and they're all, let's use this as a common touchstone of what are all these definitions and process that we're using. So it's an easy, I found an inexpensive, quick way to get everybody on the same page when we get started, as opposed to spending, and you end up spending time explaining it anyway, because half of them don't read it. But I think in there, he talks about, well, you start with the functions and then you then go to the failure modes. And I don't remember if he talks about it as this, if it's just the starting point or the failure modes are when you don't meet the function. But I've always treated it as that's the start of that discussion. There's more failure modes than just not in spec or not meeting the functional requirements.
Yes. In fact, while we're talking here, I'll look up and see if the definition should be on page 9.
You know that book well, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I like to look at different sources of material. And that's what, and so I'm really open to looking at all the different material. And I agree with you completely. Like you're starting with a new team, you want to go over definitions, get everybody on the same page, talking about the same thing.
Yep.
And I'm not going to see it real quickly because it's not on the early page, but the point I want to make is that failure mode has 2 words. Failure and mode. Failure is something ceases to work. I mean, there's a lot of definitions for failure. You'll see a lot of them, but you get the idea of failure. It doesn't accomplish the function in some way.
Right.
But the mode is the way in which it doesn't accomplish the function. And so failure mode, you got to get both those words in there. And if you can get the way that something doesn't function, you're on your journey to that cause and failure mechanism.
Yeah. Well, it's also this, I think of it as a stepping stone to say, well, if it's the water bottle, if it is just seeping, right? If it has lots of condensation on it, or if it's just diffusing through it in a very, very slow manner. So when you pick it up after 20 minutes, your hand is wet, right? That's technically a failure mode. You can observe it. It's a way that this is leaking. Or it could, you set it down and it wears a hole in the bottom of it after 4 uses. Well, that's a different way that this thing can leak. Yet they have different consequences. And I think it's a stepping stone to identifying the way it fails and leaks or tips over and spills out, doesn't contain the liquid or the water, naturally leads you to saying, well, what's the consequence of that? What happens then?
Exactly. In fact, I like the way you said that. It naturally leads you. In my experience, every step in an FMEA, like function, failure mode, effect, etc., every one of them naturally leads you to the next. So
you're very much in the school of going left to right across the
not necessarily. I will sometimes do, okay, let's brainstorm failure modes and we'll get the different failure modes. Okay, let's get the effect for each one.
Yep.
To me, that's a style thing.
Yep.
I use the Thomas Jefferson quote, in matters of style, swim with the current, in matters of principle, stand like a rock.
Yeah.
So that's his style, whether you go left or right or up and down.
And they both have their advantages. And I agree with you. It really depends on the team and which way you go. And there's an advantage to that brainstorm part where I find if you go right across the board, then that first failure mode is the one that we spend all day on. And we hardly get to the 15th failure mode, which is probably way more important.
Yeah, right. So yeah, very much on the team as to you want to keep the team focused on importance. You want to keep the team focused on things they care about that matter. Um, that's why I'll often use yellow stickies to start with, just to get people to debrief what's on their mind as the most important things. But going back to what I was saying there is, if you get the failure mode right, to concur with what you're saying, then the consequence almost falls into your lap.
Yeah.
So, well, what's the consequence of that? That's the effect. And then if you get the failure mode right, like say, okay, what are some of the causes, potential causes? And you can get those going. But it's so important to get that mode, to understand what the mode is and why. Yeah. It's in failure mode and effects analysis.
Well, I've often got folks have gotten hung up on, well, what's a failure? It's and I know that it's not just in FMEA, it's in product design. You get one anomaly during a prototype being set up, and it's like, well, was that a failure or not? What do we define a failure as? In that discussion in and of itself, just what do we call a failure? Including when we get stuff back from the field and going, well, it's no fault found. We ran these 3 things, it plugged in, it turned on, and it looks just fine. It holds water. What's their problem? And we stop looking for understanding the mode. Why did the customer return it to us? And,
No, great point. What is a failure is a valid question, but you have to get to that mode to add value to your exercise. And just reflecting and musing for a minute on, because we've had that discussion for years on what is a failure. For instance, one of my first recognitions of failures as an engineer was working in a test lab where we tested doors. So I was a door test engineer. That's like job one. And the windows would go up and down. And so I said, okay, what's the failure? And well, if it doesn't go up and down, that's a failure. Okay. That was the coaching I got.
What if it takes a strong man to even make it work,
Yeah. What if it takes 40 seconds? You're in a rainstorm and it's pelting rain and that window's going ever so slowly up. Is that a failure? And of course, the answer comes back. I always look earlier. The answer comes back. What's the function description? What's the requirement? And of course, if it's the requirement that the window goes up or down in 10 seconds or less or some amount of time, that'd be important to know.
Yep.
Because then if it takes 40 seconds, that's a failure. But some people would tell me, no, if it eventually gets up, then it hasn't failed. So it's a great topic to think about as to what constitutes a failure. And then you have to go back to what's the functional description and what are the requirements.
Well, it ties back into this mode thing then too, is too slow is observable.
Yes.
And to the customer, it's subjective,
Yep. Too slow.
But if it goes too fast, then it's a safety problem. You don't have time to stop it when your hand is in the way, kind of thing. Or if it closes with too much force and snaps off whatever's in the way, that would be a problem. I saw that on a new electric vehicle. Is the automatic closing for the hood didn't really care there was a great big carrot there, and he just chopped it right off. I think that's a problem.
Yes, indeed it is. Well, and if you have I go back to when door windows were manual. Don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah, no, I remember that well. I had many of those cars.
But now if you have an electric door window, which is the more common one, and it doesn't move at all, you push the button and nothing happens.
Yeah.
Well, nothing happens. The window doesn't go up at all. That's a mode of failure. Goes up too slow. That's a mode.
Or if it doesn't stay up.
Yeah, it falls back down.
It falls back down. Oh, we're just going to do an FMEA here and get your job squared away 40 years ago.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So the mode helps you on your journey to get at the causes, which is really what you want, causes and failure mechanisms, and so you can do something about it.
Yeah.
And that's why I stress that it's important to learn what a mode is, and as part of learning the definitions. And like you say, you want to start with common definitions
Yeah.
with the team.
I've always thought of it as the observable, which is a part of that definition, but it's the way. And that immediately expands to me is how I'd approach that. So cool. I wasn't too far off, but
No, you weren't at all. I mean, the way or manner in which something occurs very often can be something presents itself.
Yeah.
It shows up that way. It leaks, it breaks, cracks.
Yeah. If something fails and nobody cares or notices it, is it a failure? Or that's about trees falling in the forest, isn't it?
Yes.
If nobody's there, does it make any sound? There's a whole bunch of jokes with that, but I'm not a comedian, so I'll stay out of there.
In taking, Chris, you ruin the joke when you get too serious, but I could be serious about it and say, well, if something fails and the consequence of that failure is a severity rating of 1, which means it doesn't matter.
Yep.
I don't really want to deal with it.
Yeah, it might technically be a failure because it's out of spec or whatever. If nobody cares and it doesn't have any significant consequence whatsoever, we've got other things to work on that'll add more value. And I think that's the part of that whole journey is figuring out, well, what matters? What do we need to work on?
So I ruined the joke, but
But yeah, it wasn't a good joke to start with. So I never get it right.
If you're a listener and you have something about FMEA definitions that would be fun to clarify, or you have some thoughts about what we've just said, maybe you think that the antithesis is the only way to go to a function and we don't need modes or anything else, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Now we've run into plenty of different things where there's a misunderstanding or a difference of opinion. Let's call it that, of a way something should be done and stuff. It's not that anything is wrong or there are better ways to do things and all those kind of things. And others that you're like, why do we do it that way? We might be able to shed some light on it. Probably not. Maybe. Kind of, sort of. We'll see what our own failure modes are.
Yes.
But let us know. Head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. And there's a couple of ways to get in touch with us there. Carl and I and the other hosts of the show are available through LinkedIn and on our About pages on the Accendo site. So plenty of ways for you to get in touch. As long as we've got power and the internet's working, we haven't experienced too many failure modes in that process. We get interesting questions on a regular basis and try to provide a meaningful answer or direction right away. And then lots of times we bring it up in the podcast because
it's so much fun to have a podcast on what somebody sends us as a topic.
Yep. We enjoy those quite a bit. So sometimes we back into it because people do ask us questions on a regular basis, and we'd like to include you with that. So let us know. So with that, Carl, I think we'll head off into the out of the studio and into the daylight and see what we can break today.
Yes, exactly. We'll have fun doing that.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Carl. Talk to you soon.
See you later, Fred.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation if you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show. Please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.